So yeah, welcome everyone to an introduction to UI libraries with React. So you might already have some React background, but if you only started learning about React recently, then chances are you haven't really seen just how awesome the open source ecosystem surrounding React is. So what I mean by that is there are some pretty amazing libraries out there that basically supply you with really cool React components. Some of them might give you really well-styled components, which means like if you suck at CSS, which I unfortunately do, you can still build good looking websites. Some of them supply you with the power to make really smooth and slick looking animations in a pretty straightforward and intuitive way. Some of them give you more specialized components like graphs and charts, which would otherwise be an absolute pain to develop yourself. So like having even basic familiarity with a variety of libraries like this is really going to skyrocket your productivity and help you launch more advanced features for your project much more quickly. And also, if you haven't explored React libraries before, I really want to give you enough background to know what's out there and to give you the confidence to try them out and build amazing features for your project that you never really would have thought you could pull off. Otherwise, if you do have a bit of React experience with some libraries, I want to hopefully show you a wider collection of stuff that can help you push out some of the more advanced features for your projects. Okay, so before we dive into things, I'll just quickly introduce myself. So I'm Tim. I'm in my third year doing software engineering. By chance, maybe some of you might know me from Comp 2521, potentially. I was a tutor there for 3 terms, all of which were online, sadly. I'm actually from New Zealand, so for the most part, I don't have the accent, but if you hear me mispronouncing vowels, that's possibly the reason. So yeah, before I explain what we'll cover in this workshop, let me just tell you, and I'm not exaggerating when I say this, but once you're comfortable with like the basics of React and know how to find and use UI libraries, you're completely capable of building really cool projects quickly that could later land you a job, or it could help you do really well in hackathons. So yeah, it's a really fun experience exploring thousands of libraries out there available for React. It's painful and challenging at times, of course, but if you stick with it for a while, you might discover that front-end development could be something you really want to pursue. So yeah, with this workshop, I'm going to try to introduce you to some well-known and really well-crafted UI libraries that are available to React projects. And I just want to say right off the bat that I'm definitely not an expert in really any of this. In fact, I learned most of what I know about these just a few days prior to this. So the point is, like, you don't really need to be an expert to be effective with libraries like these. It's really satisfying that you can just kind of play around with a new library for a few hours and you can start becoming productive with it very quickly. Yeah, there are some exceptions where libraries actually do have a pretty steep learning curve around it, but 95% of the time that's not the case. And if you have a bit of React experience already, you probably know that the component system is pretty amazing. You can very easily bring in new things in a natural and intuitive way. So yeah, the next hour is probably going to be much more of a tour through a whole bunch of things rather than a lesson. In particular, we'll just take a look at 3 specific libraries for today. We'll start by taking a look at this one called React-Strap, which is a library that gives you a whole bunch of really neatly styled components that already look pretty good without needing any lines of CSS from you. We'll also take a look at Frame-O-Motion, which is a pretty awesome animation library. Also very intuitive and easy to use. It's worth mentioning, by the way, that this is kind of like the standard sort of animation library that you would use for most React projects. We'll also take a look at Apexcharts, which gives you a whole bunch of graphs and chart components for rendering data in a really elegant way. So yeah, that's the plan today. But let me just clarify something. The main goal of today is not to teach you any of this, really. The goal is just to leave you feeling a little more confident to try out these libraries for yourself, and also to leave you feeling excited for what's possible for you to build. So yeah, I really hope after this session you can find some inspiration to crank out some of the more interesting features for your project. So yeah, let's dive into some libraries. So we'll start off with the first library for today, which is Apexcharts. So this, like I said, is a library that gives you a whole bunch of neatly styled components right out of the box. So let me just explain some context behind this library first. So there is a very well-known and kind of old library for CSS called Bootstrap. So just search that up on Google. So this is a, like I said, old but still relevant library. In fact, I'm kind of forced to use this a bit in my internship at the moment. This is actually like really common in legit software products. So it's not like I'm showing you like a toy library. People do get paid to work with this exact thing, just because it makes front-end development like way more productive, as you'll see shortly. So let's briefly check out their homepage. So like how they mention at the top here, Bootstrap essentially gives you nicely styled components that lets you build web front ends very quickly and responsively. So yeah, let's check out some of their examples. So they have a pretty huge collection of components that you can easily bring into your project. They have essential things that you would want, like navbars, for instance. These are kind of painful to code yourself, which is why libraries like this are extremely popular. That's just one example. They have pretty much every essential UI component that you could need for building a pretty standard web application. Yeah, you have so much stuff here. You have simple things like buttons. And on this site, they also give you like templates that people have come up with, and you can like almost just take them directly and adapt them to your needs. So yeah, a very handy library that often gets used in practice for a lot of things. So one issue is that this doesn't really come with very good integration with React. So there's this other library called Apexcharts, which aims to basically take everything here and package it up nicely in easy to use React components. So let's go check out Apexcharts. Okay, so this is their homepage. Essentially, like I said, this takes all of the stuff provided in here and packages it up nicely into React components that you can just import and use directly. So we'll see that upcoming. Again, they have a whole bunch of stuff here. So just checking out their components. They have a lot of components that let you build responsively here as well. They have simple things like buttons, more advanced things like these carousels, which I think would be something we want to play around with a little bit in this workshop. They also give you these components called Modals. So these elements are pretty great to have available in any front-end project. Like with this, they're basically spawning this thing called a modal, which is like a little window that pops up over everything else. And it kind of applies like this dark backdrop, I think is the term, over the rest of your site content. So like rather than having like a sign-in page as a separate page, you could have that appear somewhere here, for instance. So yeah, lots of things in this toolbox for you to be creative with. So let's start setting this up and start working with it. Okay, so I've got my terminal open here. So as you may have already done so before a couple of times, we'll start off this by running create React app. I'll just call this UI intro. So, and I'll let that run for a bit. This is probably going to take a minute. So let me also just take this time to show you some alternatives to Apexcharts. Okay, so there's another pretty well-known one called Material UI. This is really similar to Bootstrap, but it's quite a lot more sophisticated, I would say, and it follows stricter UI UX design principles. I really would have loved to use this one for this workshop, but it's, I think, quite challenging to use, and it's a little harder to customize. So that's why we're looking at Apexcharts instead. But this library is definitely worth experimenting with because it has a pretty huge presence in the front-end development industry today. There's also this other one which I'll quickly mention called Semantic Ui. Again, very similar idea. It's just a library that gives you a whole bunch of neatly styled components that you can readily bring into your project. And so you can start off your project looking good right off the bat. Okay. All right, looks like our Create React app is finished. So I'm going to go ahead and open that in VS Code. Okay, I'm just going to bring up the terminal and I will run npm start. Let me try that again, npm start. Just going to turn off the light theme in case I get complaints. Okay, I will open localhost 3000 here. Okay, so running npm start in a clean React project has brought up this homepage. So now we're going to get started with Apexcharts, but before that, I'm just going to get rid of some of the stuff you're seeing here, just so we can kind of start from scratch. So I'll get rid of all this boilerplate that comes with Create React app. Okay, so now we have an empty page. I'll just add something simple like a hello world header to begin with. Okay, great. So yeah, this is a brand new project. So let's see how we can set up Apexcharts. So let's go back to their homepage. If you scroll down, there's a section called Getting Started with Create React App. So with their instructions here, we've kind of already done. They're just getting us to run Create React App and run npm start, and that'll host the project locally on 3000 at localhost. So after that, we want to actually bring in the Bootstrap library. So there is one thing you have to be kind of careful about with this. So I'm going to let that run. Let me zoom in. So if you can't see this too well, I'm basically installing Bootstrap version 4. And the reason I'm doing this is because, unfortunately, Bootstrap 5 came out fairly recently, and I don't think they've updated everything in Apexcharts to work properly with that new version. So I'm just going to install version 4 to be safe for this workshop. Usually installing these libraries is as easy as just like blindly copying the commands and running them. So this is much more of a special case. So with these two commands, as you might know, what they do is they download the library files and then they chuck them inside this node modules directory in your project folder. And once it's in there, you can start importing them anywhere in your React source code. Okay, so I think this installation is going to take a minute or two. So I'll just comment a little more on Material UI because this is a pretty significant component library. Let me pull up this page. I haven't really read it all that much. So there's apparently like some body of research that supports the design philosophy behind this component library in particular. So they go into a bit of discussion here. If I'm not mistaken, I think Google is a pretty big supporter of this, and they tend to use a lot of components that look very similar to all this stuff in this library. I thought that was worth mentioning. So yeah, I guess as a small goal after this workshop, you could check out some of this stuff. I've used this for projects before, and it's been really fun working with this. Okay, I'll just show you what I mean by this being kind of complex to use. Otherwise, I really would have wanted to use this. So just looking at some of their components here, let's say their slider, they give you code which you can copy and paste, which is really nice. But the problem with this is it's pretty confusing if you're not too familiar with JavaScript. Like they do this thing where if you want to apply styles, you have to pass it through a function that returns a function that returns an object. So I kind of wanted to shy away from this for this workshop. But anyway, I think Bootstrap's finished installing. So we ran this, everything completed fine. So let's bring in Apexcharts now. They're also getting us to install React and React DOM here for some reason. They're not necessary. They come with Create React App, so I'll skip those. Okay, so before this is done, there's one more thing we have to do, which is to import the CSS for Bootstrap and chuck it into source/index.js, which is over here. So let's bring this in. So doing this basically lets you apply Bootstrap styles everywhere else in your project. So I'll hit save, and I think things are going to break. So we'll have to restart npm start again. And let's just refresh to make sure everything is okay. And by this point, I think everything is set up and ready for us to start. I will do one more thing, which is to make a components directory. Very standard thing to do. It's always good to keep things organized from the start. So all of our React components are going to go inside here. All right, so let's give this a shot. We'll start off with doing something simple, I think. So going back to their documentation, let's check out some of their components. So let's try bringing in something simple like a button, for instance. So going to their buttons tab here in their components page, we can see some examples of buttons. So let's try to bring this in. So I'll copy this code snippet that they've provided, which should help us render exactly what's here. So in our components directory, I'll make a new file, which I'll just call notuglybutton.jsx, and pasting this in. I'm not even going to change anything here. I'll just leave it as it is for now. So I've pasted this in, and now let's import this. So back on app.js, I'm going to try to bring this in. So I'll import notuglybutton from our components directory and then that file. And let's try rendering this. Okay, so hitting save, let's see if we can get this button to appear. Okay, great. So it looks like that appeared, and it should match exactly what we saw on the documentation, which it does. Great, so that's buttons. You can do all the usual things, like you can attach functions to them that get run when you click on them, the same way that you do for regular HTML buttons. So it's all pretty familiar to use if you're familiar with the usual swing of things. So yeah, obviously this was a bit of a test example to start with, just so we know we have the library up and running. But let's actually bring in some things of interest that we probably want. I think every good website front end tends to have a top nav. So let's hunt for a top nav in their documentation. Okay, so it looks like under their components documentation, there's a section on Navbar. So yeah, let's try bringing this in. So it looks like this is the code. We can copy and paste if we want something that looks a little bit like this. So I'll show you very shortly after we do this that we can customize this a little more. Great, so under the components directory, let's make another file, which let's name topnav.jsx. And so I've literally just copy and pasted their code snippet here. And pasting it in, I'll just hit save. And back on app.js, let's bring that in. So importing from components, topnav, and let's try to render this and see if we can get it to appear. Okay, great. Looks like it's there. All right, I hope you agree that was pretty easy. Watch what happens as I slowly resize this window. So you'll see at one point, it transitions into this. So let me show that to you again. So initially we had all this text and drop down stuff on the left. Once we drag it to a narrower size, you'll see that it collapses and this button appears, and everything that was here got pushed into this menu that's accessible by this button. This is a pretty common design that you'd often see in mobile responsive web applications. Generally, trying to write this UI logic yourself is kind of painful sometimes, and you might not even do it right, even with hours of work, which is a big reason why libraries like this are super popular. It takes care of all this responsiveness for you. Okay, so let's try to change some aspects about how this top nav looks like. So to do that, let's look a little deeper into their documentation. So just below this code snippet that we copied, there's a short section on Navbar Properties. So props, if you remember from playing around with React, are basically arguments that a React component receives, right? So much like how a function receives arguments and does a job differently for different arguments, you can make React components behave or look differently by supplying different props to them, right? So generally, UI libraries like this are going to give you a big list of props that let you customize their components to your liking. So here, it looks like we have these props that we can play around with. Generally, good documentation would give you more info than what they have here. I think one complaint people have about this library in particular is there's a little bit of guesswork and experimentation involved with using this sometimes. But that kind of applies to most JavaScript libraries in general. So, okay, from the looks of it, we can probably turn this into a dark theme top nav. So let's try doing that. So back in the code snippet here, we're looking at the properties on this React Strap component. So currently in the code, it looks like the navbar component has a color property, which is this one here, which is set to light. And it also has a Boolean property called light, which is set to true. By the way, just having this property on its own is equivalent to saying something like this. So it's a bit of a shorthand that React uses. So yeah, let's try to change this into a dark theme and see if we can get that to work. So I'll try to swap out this light and substitute it for dark. So now we should be rendering the dark color scheme on a dark navbar. So let's see if this has appeared, and it looks like it has. Okay. This really brings me joy as someone who looks down on people who use light themes, even though I kind of used it at the start. All right. I think for this project, let's make it a CSESoc themed website, just so we have some design consistency throughout this. So let's try to customize this top nav a little bit more. I think a good place to start is by replacing this React Strap text with something like CSESoc. Let's also get rid of this components button. I don't think that's helpful for us. For the GitHub link, I guess let's just substitute this for CSESoc's GitHub. Let's see how that's looking now. So clicking this should take us to GitHub. Great. Let's try to make this a little more personalized. So rather than options, I don't know, let's say something like events. Rather than simple text, let's just say UNSW. Okay, great. I think one more thing I'll do is I'll try to add a logo here. That's pretty common to see in top navs. So let's search for a CSESoc logo. And I think this one was the transparent one. Yep. Yeah, so I'll just copy the URL to this image and let's try to add it to the very left here. So under the navbar brand component, I'll just tuck in a image component and I'll set the source to be that link we copied. And it's going to look very garbage to begin with because we haven't introduced any styling. It's just taking on its natural dimensions. So let's try to crunch this down into something more reasonable. So I'll just do something simple, like I will just directly add a style object to this image component. So I'll just do something like setting the height to, let's say, 25 pixels. And I think that's looking a little better. On second thoughts, I think I might get rid of that CSESoc text. I think the logo by itself looks pretty good. So yeah, I think that's looking decent. So let's maybe leave it off there for the top nav. But you can see how easy that was, right? We just copy and pasted their code snippet. We tweaked some of their properties to get it to like into this dark theme. And then we chucked down our own content onto the top nav. So it's pretty easy to personalize. I didn't even show you much style overriding, but you can definitely like change up the colors, add more stuff, change the formatting, etc. Okay, so I think our project is still looking really empty for the majority of the screen. So let's try bringing some more stuff onto the page. The component I have in mind for this is the carousel one we kind of looked at earlier. I quite like this one because it's simple and it's not too flashy. So this thing is basically like a gallery of photos and captions, and it's automatically configured to like rotate between different slides. So pretty much like a slideshow. So yeah, let's bring this in. So all of these come with code snippets that you can copy and experiment with. So I'll just copy this and I'll make a new component, which I'll just call something like CSE carousel.jsx. Yeah, so pasting that in and saving. And back on app.js, let's bring that in so we can see how it looks. So CSE carousel from that file we just made. And let's render this. Firstly, let's get rid of this old stuff with the button and hello world. Okay, so let's render this and see if it appears, which it does. Okay, great. So it's looking really bland. So I'm probably going to add an actual set of images and captions to this. So heading back to our carousel file, there's a bit of stuff to inspect, but at the very top, you'll see that all the data for like what image to display, what text to have is coming from this array here. So I'm just going to quickly substitute this with a new array with some actual image links and captions. Yeah, so all that's different there is I'm actually putting in real content, real images. So saving that, we get something that looks a little like this, which is a little bit of an improvement. Except if you notice when it gets to the next slide, it kind of bugs out because the images I have here are different dimensions. So let's try to fix this. Like I alluded to earlier, you can style all the Bootstrap components in the exact same way that you would style your own React components. So let's picture what we want to do first. So I want to try force this carousel into a specific height, regardless of what image is inside. So just scrolling down in the code here, we can see the component responsible for rendering this image is carousel item. So I think this would be the right element to target for CSS. So I'll give it a class name, like let's say carousel item. And then let's bring in a style sheet. So I'll import a style sheet in the same directory, which I'll just call carousel.css. Okay, so let's create this and let's try to force this into a specific height. So our class name that we added was carousel item. So let's target that class and let's try setting the height to be something like 400 pixels. Let's see if that works. Okay, and yeah, I think that looks a little better. So now the images are forced into this fixed height. But one other thing that's kind of bothering me is the white space around images that aren't quite wide enough, like these two. So let's try to fix that as well. So for this image element, if I want to style that, we'll go to the CSS file. So we'll say, well, firstly, we'll target this container element first. And then we're going to say, okay, target all the images inside this thing. And we'll set the width to be 100%, which is going to make this stretch across the full width. So saving that now, we can see this carousel is at a fixed height, and the images span across the full width, which I think looks a little bit better. Yeah, so I think this looks decent enough to go with. So let's leave it at that. Okay, so we brought one kind of substantial thing in here. Let's bring in some more. So it feels like there's a lot of stuff missing at the bottom half of the screen here. So let's see what else we can bring in. So let's go back to their documentation. And there's a whole bunch of things you can try out. The one I'm thinking of doing is bringing in these UI components called cards. So they look a little bit like this, for instance. It's a pretty standard way people like to display content on a homepage. So you can explore, there's quite a lot of variations of cards. So the one I'd like to bring in for this project, I think, is at the very bottom. So something that looks like this, for instance. So once again, like, it's very easy to use. They just give you boilerplate code that you can directly copy and paste and get working quickly. So under the components directory, let's make another React component file. So I'll call this one CSE card deck. Yeah, usually people call like groups of cards decks in libraries like this. Yeah, so I've copied this code over, which I will now save. And let's bring this in app.js and see how it looks. So importing CSE card deck from CSE card deck. And let's render this below the carousel. And let's see if it appears. Okay, great. So it does appear, although it's looking a little bit trash because the images are missing. And also there's a bit of like padding issue. I think it'd look better if we had left and right padding, but we'll get to that. So firstly, let's go back to the card deck that we copied. So I'm just going to replace all of this with the same thing, but we'll just have some actual content in them, which I prepared beforehand. So I'm just going to replace this with the exact same thing, but with actual content. So essentially I just substituted in some image links. And I also copy and pasted like the first one or two sentences from the UNSW handbook. So now we have some actual content to display. I think there was a question. Sorry, I'm not monitoring the chat too well. I can imagine a problem if you have an image, but you can't adjust the image to show something in particular. Like I have a title in the center image, but I can't show it because of the carousel. Not exactly too sure what you mean. Can have a chat to you after about that. If you're worried about like styling issues, I didn't dig into it, but like stuff like this is customizable. So all you have to do is target that in your CSS, and like I think one thing that could be improved here is like white text on a white background is just going to fail. So you could definitely add things like a black background to this. You can push it to the center or whatever. So it's super customizable. But this isn't a CSS workshop, unfortunately, and I don't think I'm good enough to attempt that for this, at least without reaching issues. So yeah, back on the deck. So we actually have content here, which is great. One thing that I'd like to improve is adding some padding to like the left and right. So there's this pretty useful set of layout components that React gives you. So going back to their documentation, there's a section on layout here, and it gives you a whole bunch of things you can use to like make sure the content on your site is displayed responsively. The one I'm looking for is called container. So these container components are great as general purpose elements to hold your site's content. So basically it just introduces some natural padding to the left and right. So let's try bringing this in. So let's close some of these tabs that we don't need. So back on app.js, let's bring in this container component from React. And let's try wrapping the card deck with this container element. So I'll chuck this inside and hopefully some better padding will appear. So I think this is looking a little more natural. Yeah, so this is a pretty common thing to use frequently in front-end development. Okay, so yeah, we have some left and right padding now. I think we'd still benefit from a little more vertical padding here. So I'm just going to be a little naughty and add a line break here. Yeah, this is generally not a good practice, but having like vertical padding is such a common once-off thing that it's easy to be lazy and do this. So I'd probably just do this for now, but usually you would introduce like a style sheet that adds like margin top, 10 pixels or something, but I'll just leave it at that because it works. So yeah, I think this is looking pretty decent so far. We didn't even have to like do much work on this at all. Yeah, hopefully like you can agree that this doesn't look too bad considering like we didn't spend much time at all on this. But if you're thinking like, hey, this library doesn't look bad, but it's not really the aesthetic you really want for your project, you can definitely override the styling here and get it to look the way you want. Like you already saw me doing a bit of that with the carousel. Like we wanted to fit it into the specific dimensions we wanted, and we wanted it to span across the whole width of the page. So you did that in a pretty similar way to how you would do it in a normal React project. So yeah, okay, I don't want to spend too long on this, just being conscious of time, because there's quite a few more interesting things to look at, but I hope this gives you some sense of how quickly you can get up and running with libraries like this. So let's bring up the slides again. Okay, so that was a quick demo into React. Let's check out the next thing. So the next thing I want to show you all is Frame of Motion. This is a really satisfying animation library that's really easy to use, and it comes with a lot of support for React right out of the bat. So I think for React projects, like I mentioned at the start, if you ever want to bring in animation, this is considered one of the standard animation libraries that people use. I think just having a few basic animations makes your front end a lot more satisfying to use, and it makes it feel a lot more like an application rather than like a static website. So yeah, you can do some really amazing things with this library. You can animate SVGs, which gives you an incredible amount of creative freedom. So let's try diving into this one. Firstly, let's go visit their homepage. So let me just get rid of all this Bootstrap stuff. All right, let's visit their homepage. Okay, so this is their homepage. If you scroll down a little bit, they give you some interactive examples that you can tune and play around with. So I can control the horizontal displacement and see how this square element responds. So this is the React component that they give to you, which allows you to enhance like regular divs with animation properties. So we'll definitely take a look at that very shortly. So yeah, if you want to like make something pop onto the screen, for instance, you could do something simple like they give you a scale parameter here, which you can tune. So you can start this off at like 0 and then bring it up to something larger at in like 1 second. And just below this is another simple demo of what you can do. So this library also exposes some a very simple event system that you can use to implement some pretty sophisticated functionality. So in this example that you can play around with, you can drag this circle around this box here, and you can see when I'm doing this, it's outputting some logs for this function call to onDrag, right? So they give you like very nice and easy functions to hook onto and customize. So if you wanted to implement some kind of a drag and drop interface, for instance, this would be a possible way to do that. This example also has a bit of cool physics implemented. So when you try to like chuck this circle at a boundary, you'll see it kind of follows a realistic trajectory. So there's a bit of momentum and collision simulation that comes with this library as well. So this is definitely not a physics engine or anything, but you can do like so much with this library. So let's quickly set this up as well. So going back to their homepage, which I was just on. So at the very bottom, I think they have a link to GitHub. Okay, so the setup for this is way more straightforward than the Bootstrap one. You can just blindly run this and that'll install frame of motion in Node modules and you can start importing and using it. Okay, so there's comparatively, there's definitely more of a learning curve to this one than React Strap. So you can't really directly paste in stuff to try out, but it's still pretty easy to pick up. There is a very nice tutorial series on this, which isn't very long. I think it's by this guy called Net Ninja. Some of you guys might know this guy. He's got a lot of awesome content. So yeah, this one's pretty great to follow. I think it's only like 2 hours. So if you have like a free afternoon, this might be a really fun and rewarding series to go through. And after you complete it, like you realize you can do some like pretty insane stuff just with this library alone. Okay, so I think that installation has finished down here. So let's try playing around with this. Okay, so let's just work in app.js for now, just to test things out. So back on their GitHub page, they give us some code to start with. Let's explore our own example. So I'll just copy their input statement. So what this line is doing is we're pulling out the motion object from frame of motion. And this object basically supplies you with a whole bunch of React components like motion.div, motion.h3, motion.image. So essentially they give you all like the standard HTML elements that you would otherwise use. But these components in particular basically just wrap around these standard components, but they let you add animations to them, right? So you, each of these things, like I said, are React components, which means you can use them like you normally would in the JSX down here. So let's try doing that. So within this container, let's try animating a div. So I'm just going to use the div element supplied by frame of motion, and I'll just add something simple like hello inside. So when we save and re-render the page, you'll see hello appears here. If we inspect element on this, you'll notice that this is just a regular div with hello. So this actually Doesn't add anything on top of this for now because we don't have any animations on this. So let's see how we can bring that in. So going back to their documentation, going back to their homepage, we can visit their documentation here. And let's go for examples. So as their first example here, it looks like they're getting a div element to double in size over the course of 0.5 seconds. Right, so let's maybe try doing something similar to this. So I'll just copy the props that they've supplied here over and see if we can get this to animate in the same way. Okay, hit save and let's see if anything happens. I think that was quite subtle. I think I missed it. But yeah, looks like that increases to scale 2, like we expected. So that was a bit subtle. So let's try to make it something ridiculous. I'll try to like scale it up to 100 times its dimensions. And I'll make it animate over 20 seconds, let's say. So now over the course of the next 20 seconds, this is gonna grow to be massive, and eventually I think it's gonna grow past the screen size. So yeah, a bit of a ridiculous example. But you can see we did something kind of cool with like just these 2 lines. And so the way this works is for the animate prop, you pass in an object with a set of properties you want the div element to animate towards. And for the transition prop, you pass in things like duration, delay, whether you want the animation to proceed in a linear fashion. So in summary, the animate prop lets you define what you want the div to look like. The transition prop lets you define the how and the when to get there. Right, so you can already implement many simple animations just filling out these 2 props alone. As you might be able to guess, the way this works behind the scenes is that the object you pass to animate gets converted to CSS. So typically anything that you can write CSS for, which you can animate, you can also drop inside here in this object. So there obviously are exceptions, but you can totally animate things like color transitions. You can animate other things like the height and the width of the div, for example. So let's go to their documentation and find out a little bit more about what we can potentially do. So we'll check out their animation API. So over here it says animations in frame of motion controlled by the motion component's flexible animate property, which was this thing we touched on. So it looks like from this code snippet we can add a rotation animation. So I believe this is going to do like a full revolution over the course of 2 seconds. So let's try adding this as well. So in addition to scaling to an insane size, let's also make this do a full revolution as well. So I've added rotate 360 to this object we pass in. So let's see if that does anything for our animation. So refreshing, we should see this get huge and do a slow spin, completing a revolution over 20 seconds. So yeah, you have a lot of creative freedom with this to do whatever you want. So we can do something ridiculous again, like we can try get this to rotate 100 revolutions over the course of 20 seconds. And you can see now it spins and exponentially spirals into craziness, and it gets bigger at the same time. But yeah, very dumb example, but like there are so many things we can do. Like we can animate the horizontal displacement of a div, which I think would be good to try out. So doing that, for instance, is a good way to get elements to like slide into view, for instance. So going back to their documentation, there's this other thing to know about, which is keyframes. So keyframes, if you don't know, are basically a sequence of values that animations can take on over a duration. So like currently we're just specifying like, oh, take on the scale 100 over 20 seconds, but we can do something else. Like we can do like 10, 5, 10, 5, 10. So what this is going to do instead is it's going to start off at scale 10, shrink down to scale 5, climb up to 10, shrink back down, etc. So to demo this, let me make the duration a little shorter. So when I set the duration to 4, it's going to, oh, let's get rid of the rotate. That's disorienting. So yeah, over the course of 4 seconds, it's going to evenly like distribute the amount of time it spends in each of these different values for scale. So as you saw, we got this to like pulse between scale 10, 5, back to 10, etc. And we can combine this with animating more aspects. Like we can change up the horizontal displacement over time, which is the X property. So we can get this to, for example, move 100 pixels to the left and then 100 pixels to the right and so on. So let's try doing that and see how it looks. So refreshing, we can kind of see it like oscillates back and forth and like pulses in and out, right? So you can be very creative with this keyframe system that they've provided. Okay, so far we haven't really done anything that looks good with animations. So let's scrap this div, and one thing I think would be cool to animate is to get these cards to slide onto the screen. So we might try doing that. Just being conscious of time, I realize it's very close to 11. This is definitely going to go quite a bit beyond that. So if you have to drop out, it's worth knowing that this is all recorded, so you can come back to it later. Otherwise, let's continue. So I think it'd be cool if we can get these cards to like kind of slide in rather than just being there when you load the page. So let's try to get that in. Okay, so let's go back to our card deck, which is rendering this stuff here. And let's try to get the first card to slide into view. So to start off, I'm going to import motion from frame of motion. And I'm just going to replace this card tag with motion.div rather than wrapping it around with it. And I'm also going to add class name card. So let me just explain why I'm doing this specifically. The reason I'm doing this is to get around some annoying styling issues, because Bootstrap is not going to apply the regular card styles if it doesn't see something with this class as the immediate child of this component. So it's a bit of an annoying workaround. But yeah, we'll leave it at that. So if I save, nothing should be different so far. Okay, so if we want to get this card to slide into view, there's this other property in frame of motion called initial. So I'll search for that on their documentation. So as you might be able to guess, this initial property lets you set what the div should look like before the animation kicks off. Right, so for this, we'd want to set the initial property to be an object where the displacement is something like 1,000 pixels to the left. So this is going to start this component off the screen to the very left where we don't see it. And then we can use the animate prop, which we saw earlier, to specify where the div should be at the end of the animation. So we'll set this to x0, which means just go back to the regular position you would be in after the animation finishes. And we'll just quickly add a duration. Let's say 1 second. And let's see how this looks. So we'll refresh the page, and you can now see that kind of slides into view. So it's looking a little more interesting. So you can see that pretty much does what we want, but I do think it looks a little weird. Like it kind of just slides awkwardly into view, so like very rigidly. So there's a lot of things you can do to make this look a little like flashier. So this library supplies this method of simulating spring physics. So when this slides in, we can get it to like kind of like bounce around a bit, which you'll see soon. So we can search for something called spring in their documentation. So the spring thing is pretty cool. It has quite an elaborate amount of customizability. So with this, you can make this animation simulate spring physics for realistic motion. So it's very subtle, but it's actually a noticeable improvement to what we currently have. So it looks like the way you use this is under the object you pass into transition, you specify the type to be spring. So let's try doing that. So in addition to duration 1, I'll also just add type to be spring. And now if we try this again, it'll kind of slide into view and like wobble a bit, which was kind of hard to notice. So like I said earlier, there's a lot of stuff you can customize about this. Like for instance, like there's a whole bunch of terms that are like kind of specific to physics, if you're familiar with that. So you can set like the damping force to be a certain value. There's also parameters like mass, which you can tune to make it look more lethargic, which means like make it look kind of slower and like more heavyweight. You can change things like stiffness, which like I think makes the movement a lot more sudden. So we can try tuning some of this. I think I might go for bounciness. So it looks like bounce we can tune in our transition object. And apparently by default it sets it to 0.25. So we can be ridiculous with this again. I might set it to, I think if I set it to 1, it's gonna be really dumb. Yeah, yeah. Let's drop it to something like 0.4. I think that looks slightly better. Yeah, let's maybe leave it at that. So yeah, there's like an endless amount of things you can customize, and this is just like one small part of the entire library. So I really can't do this much justice in the time we have for this. Let's see. So I might animate one more aspect about this. So in addition to just sliding onto the screen, let's also make it rotate a bit. So under initial, I'm going to set the rotate property to be something like 180 degrees. So this is going to start off being inverted. And then we're going to set the rotation back to what it normally would be. So 0 degrees. And I think if we see this now, it should kind of tumble into view like that. So yeah, you can be really, really creative with this. And you can definitely come up with things that look much better than this. But we'll probably leave it here. Let's see. Yeah, I might leave it there for a frame of motion, unfortunately. Once again, I'm not really doing this library justice. There's just so much to explore. I'll give you an idea of what we're not going to cover. There's a concept called orchestration. So normally if you apply these animations, they're all going to happen at the same time, but there's an API for basically getting them to animate sequentially in a very specific manner. So if you want, you can get like these cards to like slide in one by one, for instance, with a particular delay in between. So there's a lot of customizability with this. There's also another cool thing they provide, which is Animate Presence. So as you might be able to tell from the name, what this function does for you is when you delete a React component, let's say, on a page, you can set up an animation to be played when that happens, right? So you can get elements to fade out when you click a delete button, for instance, rather than just like kind of instantly disappearing from existence. So yeah, this library just gives you so many like things to polish your project with and make it feel like an actual web application. So yeah, there's so much more to this that's really fun to explore. So I highly encourage you to try this out if you have time after this workshop. Yeah, I think every project would look a lot better if they even had simple animations like the ones you can very easily build from libraries like this. But yeah, I'll leave it here for frame of motion, and we'll quickly check out our last library, which is Apexcharts. Okay. All right, let's dive into Apexcharts. So this is quite a different library from the others we've seen so far. We'll probably only spend like a couple of minutes on this one. In general, working with these React libraries, it roughly follows the same pattern. So let's start off by searching for this library on Google. So we'll search for React Apexcharts npm. And the first link is going to be the npm entry for this library we want to experiment with. So we'll just start off by running their installation command below. Again, very straightforward. 90% of the time it's just you blindly copying the installation command, and the imports are automatically set up for you, and it should work out of the box, which it does for this. And once again, as this installs, let me just take you through other great libraries that you could have used as an alternative to this. There's this other really great one called chart.js. So this one's great, but there's a slightly steeper learning curve for this one, and the React integration for this is nowhere near as good as the one for Apexcharts. But this one is very similar. It just gives you access to a whole bunch of really nice looking graph components that you can render custom data in. There is another library called D3, which is this one. Yeah, this is an absolutely insane library. It has a really steep learning curve, I would say, compared to the other ones. But this gives you like an insane amount of creative freedom. There are textbooks on this which are like really thick, so that gives you an idea of how huge of a library this is. So yeah, now that installation is finished for Apexcharts, let's quickly get started. So down below in their npm page, they show us a code snippet that we can quickly start off with. So I might copy that over. So under components, I'll just make a new component, which I'll just call coolchart.jsx. And so I'll paste that in. And I'll export this component. I'll just rename this quickly. So coolchart. And one thing we're missing is importing the library from React to Apexcharts, and also importing React. Like that, and I think that should work. So this, by the way, is a class component. It's very similar to functional components in React, which are likely the ones you're more used to. It's essentially the same thing, but this one divides the logic into different lifecycle methods, if you're familiar with that. If you're not, it's not really anything to worry about. Yeah, so let's bring this into app.js. So we'll import coolchart from the file we made. And let's render this below our card deck. Okay, and hopefully we'll see a graph appear. Component is not defined. Yep, so that's a property under the React object. Okay, and yeah. now we can see a simple bar chart appear. So there's a lot that comes out of the box with this. Let me zoom in. So it's not just rendering data, it's also giving you like interactivity. So like you can kind of hover over bar charts and they'll show you more details regarding the data for each series. One cool thing that this example provides in particular is there's a button here which lets you like download the chart as a PNG or CSV file, which is pretty cool. Like you can imagine if you wanted to write this component yourself, it'd take like hours and hours, I would think, and you probably wouldn't even really get it to look as good as how it is here. So yeah, a lot of projects have like a big focus on like fetching data from APIs. So like if you have some interesting statistics that you could kind of extract out of like whatever data you're fetching for projects, having this library would be a really cool way to like kind of reveal insights in the data you're working with. So yeah, that was a simple bar chart. Let's explore their documentation a bit, which is really awesome. Probably ranks as one of the best documentation I've seen for React libraries. So this is their homepage, apexcharts.com. We can explore some of their demos. So this takes you to a page where you can select what framework you're working in, whether that's no framework, so just vanilla.js or some of the others. So we'll obviously go for React. Okay, so for this workshop, let's maybe stick to something simple, but you can see there's a huge menu of different chart UI that you can bring in. At the very bottom, they even have like a world map. That could be a very interesting part of a data visualization project. Yeah, but let's go for something simple. So I might just go for generic pie chart. But yeah, there's some really cool stuff like heat maps and some like pretty advanced ones down below. So let's just check out the pie chart for now. Again, when you click pie chart, they give you quite a few more variations on top of this. Oh, I think I'm lagging out a bit. There we go. Hopefully it's not affecting the stream too much. But yeah, so under pie charts, we can select from a whole different range of different pie charts. So let's go for the simple one, just to demo this. Okay. So clicking that takes us here, and you can see like how minimalistic this is. Like they show you a sample of what you might want and the code to go with it. So I'll just copy this over to a new component file, which I'll just call CSE pie chart.jsx. So I'll paste that in, and I have to change up some stuff. Like this is trying to render the component directly, which is not what we want. So instead, we'll want to export this so that we can bring it in app.js. So we'll export this class component, and up above, we'll do all our imports. So we're just bringing in React and React Apexcharts, and I think that should work. Oh, so it's React Apexchart, not just chart. Okay, so let's save that and let's bring it in to our app. So I'll import, what was it? CSE pie chart from components, CSE pie chart. And let's render this alongside the bar graph that we currently have. So yeah, there's our pie chart. So there's, again, quite a lot of nice effects that come out of the box with this. Like if you hover over a particular slice of the pie, it gives you nice annotation about what category it is. If you hover over the keys, it highlights the corresponding slice for you. So again, like most of this styling stuff would be kind of a pain to develop yourself. So this library is very neat for that. Let's take a look at how the data is actually being rendered for this. So you can see that code snippet we copied came with some example data. So let's see how this works. So the actual JSX that gets rendered is here. So this React Apex chart component takes in an options prop and a series prop, which are coming from here. Right, so as you might guess, in the series prop, we're supplying numbers that determine how big these slices are. And then in the options, we have this field called labels, which attaches labels to each of these raw data points that you're passing in. So like team A is going to correspond to 44, team B is going to correspond to 55, which is what's happening here. Okay, so like how do you figure this stuff out? Generally, you can figure out a lot just by making guesses and like experimenting and tweaking things directly in the code. But otherwise, this library has some really, really great documentation. So I'm just searching React Apex chart pie chart documentation, and I think the first link is pretty insightful into like what options we can pass in. So if you ever want to figure out how much more to customize, how much more you can customize with this, you can look up their documentation, and they always have like really nice examples of how to work with them. So yeah, with this, I'm just gonna once again substitute in some actual data to make it look a little more legit. So I'm gonna replace this with some mock data about Comp 2521 grade results. So let's save that. And just below, we'll see a new pie chart rendering results for Comp 2521. I think I made too many people fail for this, but anyway. Yeah, so I probably won't be able to cover too much more, given that this workshop's only really meant for to run for 1 hour. But to summarize, like the way you work with this library is, as we saw, you just find a chart that you're after, you plug in your own data, and then you customize this options object to format stuff the way you want, to have the colors the way you want, and for you to attach labels to your data, etc. I think the interface for this is really, really nice and easy to work with compared to some of the other libraries out there like D3. And for most use cases, what we just went through here is pretty much covers most of it. Right, so I think it's time I start wrapping up for this. Really sorry I went this over time. Okay, let's bring up slides again. Okay, so like I mentioned before, there are so many other cool libraries out there. Like I mentioned Material UI quite a bit, and also D3. These are alternatives to some of the things you saw today. There's another animation library called React Spring, which is kind of like a competitor to Frame of Motion. This one has a bigger focus on kind of simulating spring physics to enhance your UI with. This one's also really great, also reasonably intuitive to use, and you can achieve some pretty insane animations with this library as well. But yeah, we touched on quite a lot today. I really hope this tour through a bunch of different UI libraries for React has given you some inspiration and confidence to try them out. It's really satisfying because you can very quickly push out real cool features for your projects. And like being able to find things online, read documentation, figure out how to adapt things to suit your requirements is a pretty important skill in itself. And trying to explore these libraries really exercises those skills. So yeah, I think that'll do it for this workshop. Appreciate all of you attending and sticking through to the end. If you want the code for this project we did for whatever reason, if you want to like review stuff, or if you want to like take what's there and improve it, where is it? I have like 5 browser tabs open. Give me one sec. Okay, here it was. So yeah, if you want to play around with this project a little more or review the source code later, let me just chuck this into the chat, which I've totally forgotten about. Let me go through that after we wrap up. So yeah, if you have any feedback for this workshop, feel free to fill in this feedback form, which I will paste in the chat. And also just a reminder about some upcoming CSESoc events as well. There's a continuous integration and continuous development workshop coming up soon. I think that's next Tuesday at 2 p.m. Sorry. There's also a upcoming hackathon arranged by CSESoc. So I think this comes in 2 weeks' time on Saturday, 17th of July. So like with this hackathon, it's an excellent opportunity to try out a whole bunch of libraries and get stuff out very quickly. And you can really build impressive stuff very quickly with these libraries once you're familiar with them. Yeah, there's also the personal projects competition, of course, running for all of term 2, including the break. So for this, you can like form a team of 4 and apply some of the skills you learned here, as well as other workshops. Apologies if I'm not marketing this too well. I think there's a link to Facebook, which I've chucked into the chat. So if you go there, you can find more details regarding the personal projects competition. I think that was it for upcoming events. If I missed anything, Gordon, please paste it in. So yeah, thanks a lot, guys, for attending. I really hope you have some inspiration to build something great after this.